Frank, it's beautiful outside in Edmonton. When you go from the rink back to your hotel, are you going pedway system or are you getting some fresh air?
I'm an efficient man. I go pedway.
Pedway system for Mr. Seravalli.
Clever.
Pedway, and look, I probably could use to go outside, not just to get the fresh air, because I've mostly spent this Stanley Cup final in a metal tube going 500 miles an hour. But I would say I also need to do anything I can to get some steps. I mean, who's kidding who here?
Mm-hmm.
Flight much better this time?
Yes. Only 2 flights instead of 3. So that was good. A step in the right direction.
Yeah, very, very good. What do you make? Like, we were just, and again, dumb shit goes viral all the time, but there's someone.
You don't say, huh?
Yeah. There's
Michael Bublé.
That was kind of funny. Actually, okay, so if people don't know that, because the backstory you told it today on the DFO Rundown is actually quite good. Michael Bublé became the top comment on the Canucks Instagram of the Horrobin signing when Bublé himself commented, but Frank S. said the AAV would start with an 8. Have you squashed the beef with Mr. Bublé?
We have. Michael Bublé sent me a note yesterday, which was nice. He didn't need to. And he apologized. And I was like, hey, man, you're a passionate, Canucks, not homer, but you're a super fan.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I get where you're at, and just 2 guys talking hockey. That's all it was.
I love that.
That's awesome.
He really is a great hockey fan, and he was the star of All-Star Weekend and all of that. But anyways, this thing that's going viral, Frank, is basically this sports TikTok account or whatever saying the Oilers have had the luckiest run to the Stanley Cup final imaginable. And while maybe I understand that getting LA and Vancouver isn't traditional or isn't as tough as it could have been if you would have gotten, say, like Colorado and then Vegas, to discount what the Oilers have done to get to this point, I don't think I'm being a homer when I say that's stupid.
Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And you know what? Matthias Ekholm was talking today about how much playing the Canucks in round 2 helped this team. For one, it was an all-Canadian matchup. There were more eyeballs, more focus, more attention, more pressure. And they also never had a lead in that series. People that were out east, I actually mentioned this to someone in the press room at the Stanley Cup final the other day. They said, hey, the Oilers were down 2-1. And I was like, yeah, and 1-0 and 3-2. I mean, that series was a grind. And the second part about that series is they also faced a giant defense core that really made life difficult for them. They had to do things and be in uncomfortable positions that you can say whatever you want about the strength of the Canucks. They still won the division last time I checked. So Dallas, does anyone think that was a cupcake? I don't really like. Okay, so things flipped for you in the last 3 games of the regular season and you got the Kings. Great. The key against the Kings was not making it a long series. You did that. Like, you can only play the hand that's in front of you. So if you want to knock the path, I'd say that has absolute jack shit to do with where the Oilers are now, because you can't fake your way to 14 wins. You just can't.
Yeah. Liam and I were talking. It was our Sherwood Ford Giant question of the show to kick things off here from our pontoon boat. And it was, what scares you the most? We decided to be vulnerable as Oilers fans for a second. What scares you the most about what Florida could bring to the table tomorrow? If you were to put yourself in our shoes, what should be scaring Oilers fans the most about tomorrow night?
I think it's more mindset than anything, because almost everyone that you talk to thinks, oh, there's no way the Oilers are losing Game 6 on home ice. Of course they're going to Game 7. There's a reason why only one team in league history has ever come back from 3-0 in the Stanley Cup final, and it's been 80 years since it happened. Because it's insanely hard to win 4 straight against the same team. And you take that, plus also the fact that the Panthers actually played pretty well in Game 5. It's not like they were a broken, disjointed mess of a squad like they were in Game 4. They very easily could have won Game 5. And we talked about this today on Daily Faceoff Live. In order to win, the Oilers got a shorty. They got a once a season play from Connor McDavid, and they also got maybe the flukiest McDavid goal that you're going to see. I know he shoots for that, but you think Bobrovsky's going to not be ready for that one next time? Like, they needed all those things and still won by the skin of their teeth and hung on in the third. Like, when Florida scored with 15:56 to play, it was a pure buckle your seatbelts type moment. And Tyler, you were probably head in your beer at Greta watching that game.
Yeah, I was not handling that all too well,
No.
but I don't think any of us were. We had the whole crew out at Greta, and then it was absolutely rocking after that. Tomorrow night is going to be on a totally, totally different level, and we'll have you on tomorrow, Frank, to do kind of some game day stuff there, so we'll continue to break it down then with you. But I wanted to talk away from this series a little bit. Yesterday was a spicy one, and I've seen this kind of be thrown around. Is there, and I don't know if this is like a weird question to ask, is there any sort of memo from the league to teams to be like, hey, don't do your business on game days, do it off game days? Or is it just like an unwritten thing, or is it just
It's an unwritten thing. I think it's more just a preference. Like,
okay,
look, there's certain things that can't wait. There's certain things that the league has, if they're upset about information and transactions, like, they only have themselves to blame for the schedule that they made.
Yeah.
Whenever we got the schedule in, trying to think, we get the schedule in mid-August, and I saw the important dates, and it was like last possible day of the Stanley Cup final, June 24th. The fact that like usually what happens is the schedule moves up, right? Like, first round ends sooner, everyone can move on. Second round, third round, you can kind of, begin to shrink it down. They kept the original schedule. Game 7 is June 24th, and that's draft week. Teams need to make offseason moves. This is the time of year where my phone's typically blowing up more than any other. And you need to have teams be able to turn the page that have been in off-season mode for some of them more than 2 months already. Since the last day of the regular season, I think, was April 16th. Like, it's been a long time. So there is, to answer your question, I think there's a preference and it's unwritten, but I think mostly they say, if at all possible, please wait until game day to a non-game day, to let it out.
Fair enough. Trader Ryan is in. He says the PLD trade was out of the blue. And this goes back to something I've said a bunch of times. Like, it really wasn't. We are so stuck in Stanley Cup final mode here that, like, we are forgetting as collective nation citizens here at Oilers Nation that, man, the draft is 8 days away. Like, this is when stuff starts to happen a little bit. What do you make of this deal, Frank? And why is this, because we speculated a lot about a buyout for LA, why is this trade better than just a buyout and freeing up more cap space for next year?
This is so much better than a buyout. I can't even, like, Rob Blake must be jumping up and down. So for one, instead of 14 years of dead cap space, which, by the way, you aren't even sure that you could pull off based on the date of Game 7 and the buyout window opening 48 hours after the fact, Dubois might have already turned 26, which would have resulted in a 2/3 buyout and makes it way less appealing. So that's one. You avoid 14 years of dead cap space. 2, you were able to trade it and not have to retain any salary. And 3, you got back someone that fills an actual void for you and someone that you're comfortable with in Darcy Kemper, who's played on your team before and had, by the way, really good numbers before he ended up going to Arizona. So this is a grand slam upper deck home run for Rob Blake and the Kings. And the reason why people don't look at it as such is because they say, well, look at the 3 pieces plus the first round pick that you gave up last year to get Dubois and then the contract that you signed. And yes, all of that is true. But when you get to 2024, you can't unring that bell. Mm-hmm. So the only thing worse than a colossal mistake like that one is to double down on it and say, you know what? No, we're good. We're going to keep PLD. We are going to fix it. We're going to work it out. And then 1 year from now, with 6 years left on his deal at $8.5 million, then you'd be having the same conversation of how do we get rid of this guy? They pulled the trigger, and they also did it 11 days before he gets full no trade clause protection, where he could have say where he goes. You only had 11 days left on the calendar where you could trade him anywhere you wanted to.
Do you think this trade, I guess, makes it realistic for the Oilers to be able to move one of their big contracts about trading, retaining cap?
So, like, are you thinking about like Darnell Nurse?
Nurse, Campbell, Kane, one of those three, I guess.
Kane's probably not going anywhere. At his price point, he's still valuable.
Mm-hmm.
I would say when it comes to Campbell, the goalie market, that's the other thing that really changed in the last 24 hours. It really dried up. We went into it and potentially half of the teams that needed a goalie solved their problem yesterday. The Kings got Kemper. The New Jersey Devils got Jacob Markstrom. And now you're kind of left with Toronto, Ottawa, and maybe Colorado if they decide to make a move because they don't trust Georgiev. I mean, that really changes it. So no one needs Campbell and no one wants the contract. And the buyout, at least at this point, just makes too much sense based on the fact that the Oilers would basically cover off all of Connor Brown's bonus money next year on the cap by freeing up the space from buying out Campbell.
Yeah, that's fair. We did get a comment in the chat here. Let me find it. Dacky wants to know your thoughts on Janmark Desharnais extension talks.
I don't think they've really engaged with either camp yet. I think the initial conversations that they had with Desharnais before the playoffs started, he was asking and looking for a lot. This is his first and potentially only decent payday in his career as a late bloomer. So I personally don't know if they can afford to keep him based on what he's, I think, perceived to be looking for. And I don't want to throw out any numbers because I don't have them rock solid guaranteed that they're accurate, but it was a lot more than the 1.1 million projection from AFP Analytics. I'll say that. And when it comes to Janmark, I think that's been a really good fit. I think he's a guy that's bounced around a little bit, probably unnecessarily. I think he does a lot of really important things for this team. And I also don't think leverage wise around the league that he's going to have a ton to really lean on. If the Oilers could maybe get a little bit of term, I'm not saying anything crazy, but like a 3-year deal, maybe that's something that would be pretty comfortable for him to want to stay.
Fair enough.
What did you make of the Markstrom trade?
A lot of people were down on it from Calgary's perspective, but there's really not many guys that have moved for first round picks as goalies. And I like that Calgary was able to get one. Doesn't bother me that it's in 2025 because they're still building for 2027 and beyond. And you get a defenseman that you have been coveting, they say, in Kevin Ball. I said earlier, since you mentioned Desharnais, he's a little bit more limited version of Desharnais. Size, reach, more physical than Desharnais. So you pencil him as your 6 and you move on from there. And look, it was never going to be perfect with Markstrom, but the fact that he wanted out really kind of complicated their hand, and especially the fact that he had the full no trade. So it was only going to be to a destination that he wanted, and he wasn't interested in returning for next season. So the clock was ticking. They get their first and they move on.
I've seen this gentleman in the chat before, so I feel like we should throw him a bone. He's a Minnesota Wild fan who's just watching our show because he loves hockey. Frank, he wants to know, are the Wild going to get a first for Gus Bus then? He'd be throwing up confetti.
You'd be throwing up confetti, but you're more likely to be throwing up. I'm just kidding when I say that. Look, the Wild are in an interesting spot because Gustafsson, imagine having this conversation 1 year ago. He looked to kind of be their goalie of the future. And yes, I know you have Jesper Wallstedt waiting in the wings, but you've got Fleury coming back for his 40-year-old year. You've got Wallstedt as a first-round pick with pedigree that they really are believers in, that has had some experience now in the AHL. And Gustafsson is one guy on your team that you can use not only as a trade asset, but also to generate cap space. They're certainly going to be working hard over the next 10 days to 2 weeks to try and find a market for him. But I just mentioned how limited that market is now. I think he would make a lot of sense in a place like Toronto, because he already came from Ottawa. So I doubt they go back there again, but Toronto, like you put him and Wall together, not going to cost you a ton on the cap. I guess the big question is, what's the acquisition cost?
Yeah, that's fair.
It's probably looking like a second round pick.
We got sidetracked a bit by that one, but just quickly circling back to Calgary, I keep seeing a lot of stuff on Twitter of like, this Calgary team is going to stink next year. I saw our guy Mike Gould from Daily Faceoff, who we've had on before. He said,
dude, Mike Gould could tell you that the sky is orange. Whatever the take is, I have the exact opposite usually.
But he was saying, he said next year he wouldn't be surprised if the Flames are like a deep lottery team, like top 3, top 5. Is the plan in Calgary to like really rebuild that hard, or are they going to get aggressive here at some point and start re-adding?
They're not rebuilding. They're going to go out and sign free agents. They're trying to do this on the fly. It's really hard to do because you have to drill down on your draft picks, but they have zero designs on being a bottom 5 team. And I know people, I've heard, not just him, I've heard media members say all the time, oh, the Flames are going to stink for the next 10 years. That's not how I see it. So add in, just for hypothetical, a Jake DeBrusk, add in another midterm free agent, re-sign Shillington, add a top 4 defenseman somewhere that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. Like, then you see the progression from Dustin Wolf. You see what the health is like of Dan Vladar. Can you get Jonathan Huberdeau going? I know they just met with him again to try and, Ryan Huska spend time with him. Like, they have Kadri, like they're really like, they're not going to bottom out. And I think that's the tough part about where they are, but they're also realistic about not wanting to, because that's not something that their market is really going to be interested in.
They're pretty much what St. Louis was this year, where they just, you trade out the guys at the deadline, get some picks, and then a little bit different, but similar, right?
Well, the difference is St. Louis has a cup to show for it.
Yes, that is fair. Calgary, no. Not even 2004.
Never. Well, not since, they just celebrated their 35th anniversary.
Congratulations.
All right, Frank, we kept you long, but we appreciate your time as always. Thanks for doing this.
See you guys.
What's up, Nation citizens? If you like that video, then you need to be subscribed to the Oilers Nation YouTube. Podcasts, live shows, exclusive interviews, and analysis. Everything you need from your favorite voices at Oilers Nation. And you don't want to miss any of it, so hammer that subscribe button.